Good afternoon. My name is Lois Brown, and I'm a U.S. trained physical therapist and a wheelchair seating and mobility specialist from Philadelphia. I've been in this field 28 years, in Australia almost 5. I am currently the clinical education manager at Rehabhire in Melbourne. The goal of this session is to improve the quality and efficiency of the wheelchair service delivery process in 2 ways. 1, learn the critical information to be communicated between the OT therapist to the equipment supplier. And in order to do that, we will introduce standardized wheelchair and seating measures and terminology, which will ensure us to communicate efficiently. These can help us to produce a properly sized demo for a trial, hire equipment, and also discuss critical product parameters that are absolutely critical for a successful trial and a final outcome. In this session, I will introduce you to resources that will help you to achieve these learning objectives. Please refer back to these when you have downloaded the resource manuals that you will learn about shortly. Today, we will cover the introduction of linear measures and talk about that critical information. But clinical education from Rehabhire is available to teach these concepts further. Corresponding components of the wheelchair and measures of the seated person's body, the seating support system, and the wheelchair frame must have different terms so that they can be differentiated because they are not necessarily the same. Variations in the terms can create barriers for communication, inefficiencies in the service delivery, errors, and unfortunately could lead to a poor outcome for the client. Let's look at this example. If you say the client's seat depth is 18, what does that mean to you? And what does it mean to me? Well, it could mean it's the distance from the back of the client's buttocks to the back of the knee in sitting. It could mean it's the actual seat depth of the cushion, or the effective seat depth from the back support to the front of the cushion. And finally, it could be the wheelchair seat frame depth from the back post to the front of the seat pan. So, in order to learn these terms a little bit better, I'm going to share with you the resources. And these were developed by the Paralyzed Veterans of America Education Foundation, provided the funding, under the direction of Kelly Waugh at UC Denver Assistive Technology Partners Project in Denver, along with Barbara Crane and a team of other colleagues. The overall goal was to enhance clinical practice and outcomes research in the field of wheelchair seating by promoting the adoption and use of these terms. It includes the correct terminology for angular and linear measurements of the seated person's body and the seating support system. For each term, the guide explains the purpose of the measure, its clinical relevance, with an accurate definition, a sample measurement procedure, and 1 to 2 illustrations to help clarify that measure. You will see in the reference page how you can download these free of charge. You can order hard copies if you wish, but of course for us it would be much less expensive to download them and bind them ourselves. None of the people included in this project, including myself or any of the other colleagues and Kelly, do not receive any personal financial gain from the offering of these. This is simply in order to have a global language for all therapists involved in wheeled seating and mobility. Let's use the example from Kelly. This gentleman was seen for a custom mold, as you can see, in a simulator. And the effective seat depth at the final simulation was to be 18 inches and a seat to lower leg support angle of 75. What occurred when delivery came was an effective seat depth of 21 inches. We know that an elongated seat depth can cause a posterior pelvic tilt, a thoracic kyphosis, and a more forward head. And that's very obvious here if you look at the pictures. So was 21 inches meant to be the seat frame in order to accommodate a thicker back? And then the effective seat depth would have been 18 inches? Quite possibly. So we can see how easily these terms can affect the final outcome. So in order to help us at Rehabhire meet the client's needs, we are looking for information from you from the OT assessment or your secondary specialty visit where you are actually focused on their wheeled seating mobility goal and collecting critical information before you have the supplier come out for a trial. And so either you have some of that information and you can translate it to our rehab referral form, or you can go to our website under referral forms and download this form and take it with you to that secondary appointment in order to gain some of this critical information. What you'll see here now is an enlarged copy of the measurements. And I'm going to highlight just 5 of them for today. The buttock thigh depth, shoulder height, lower leg length, shoulder width, and hip width at the widest point are absolutely critical for us to find a demo chair and set it up properly in order to make sure it's a good trial. So along with the standards book, you also have a diagram here to remind you of what those measurements are and to give us those measurements in centimeters. I prefer inches, but you can fill it out in centimeters and we will work with that. Now, also on the form is critical information about the person's diagnosis, especially if it's progressive or non-progressive, because that will have us looking at more expandable electronics that have enhanced features that can be utilized when we need to either change the drive input or do different programming or use environmental controls or Bluetooth technology to control computers. And so those things will help us to bring out the most appropriate trial equipment. Also, if they have a pressure ulcer or they have a history of a pressure ulcer, we also want to know what their weight and height is, especially if their weight is stable or whether it's fluctuating, because that tells us what base models to consider when we look at the weight capacity maximums. Now, they may have a seating system that they really like. They may have things that they really don't like. And it's important to tell us that so that we start to narrow the choices for the client. We also might want to know what equipment they want for trial. And when I say that, I don't mean a specific make and model. It's important for you as a therapist to identify what are the most key product components that are necessary to meet the client's goals. Is it seat elevate for bed transfers or reaching in the grocery stores, as you saw on the front screen of the presentation? Or is it something that's critical to their function as tilting all day without having to transfer? So please let us know what those things are, and that's only the beginning of the conversation for us, as we will call you and gain additional information as necessary before the appointment. We've made these additions to the hire request form because Rehabhire does quite a bit of hiring of equipment, and the hip width, buttock thigh depth, lower leg length, shoulder height, and seat to elbow measurements can be really helpful for us to set up a chair and then have it sent out to that individual. You do have a place on the form to indicate the seat width and depth you were hoping for, what type of cushion, backrest, and if they need a headrest, and those things you can search on the website and identify what is for hire versus what is for custom scripting. So that is another form that's on our website that you can download. Just to summarize, the body measurement that we're asking for you to give, and that we will of course verify when we're there for the assessment with you, is the buttock thigh depth. That is going to help us to determine the seat depth. And that will help us determine the overall seat frame depth to accommodate the seat cushion and the back support. So please understand and look at this reference for each one of them. It's actually helpful to print this out, maybe put it on the back of your clipboard just to remind you, and then read some further in the standardized books. Just as one of the final notes, I mentioned rehab installation is part of the Rehabhire business. There is a registered builder, and he works directly with us. And what's important here is that while you're doing a home modification for the individual, there may be some assistive technology or wheelchair that is being discussed quite possibly prior to you seeing this individual. And so you may need to note what your maximum doorway widths are, if there are certain limited turning radius, because that will come into play when we look at certain pieces of equipment for the home, either in a power chair or tilting space where it's a longer base, and we need to know that there's enough room to accommodate. It's also important for you on this form to also note the measurements that have been laid out by Mario the builder in order for us to do a good quote and to have a good outcome for the individual. We will still visit the client once the funding is secured, but it is helpful to get an idea when you're there of those measurements. These are the references that I told you about earlier, and you can see that there's a download link for the glossary of wheelchair terms. They have not all been validated, but they are, it is a good working document for naming parts of the chair. And the clinical application guide to standardized wheelchair seating measures has been verified and validated, and therefore you can download it here. There's also another really great reference called the Seating and Wheeled Mobility Clinical Resource Guide. It was developed by Michelle Lang and Jean Minkle in the States, and Kelly and Barb have written a chapter in that book that helps to explain also the application of the term, so you might find that to be really interesting. This is the Rehabhire site, and you can see right here that there is a drop down for referral forms where it'll be easy for you to download those forms that I showed you earlier. And thank you so much for joining us. I am really honored to participate in the OT Exchange, and we hope that you have a good rest of the conference. Thank you.